Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Most of you probably know who I am, but we may have one or two that don't. I'm Andrea Klein. I'm the founder and president of Breathe with MD Inc. And I just want to thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar, Building Self-Advocacy Skills. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Self-advocacy has really played a tremendous role in my life and my journey living with a neuromuscular disease. You've probably noticed that we have everyone on mute. Our speaker and myself will be the only ones unmuting for the bulk of our time in the presentation tonight. And I just want to ask you just to be conscious, aware of whether you've unmuted yourself, because we don't want your background noise to prevent anyone from hearing our speaker this evening. So then at the end of the presentation, if there's time, which I think that there will be, we will have opportunity for you to unmute yourself then to ask any questions that you have. Also, too, you may have noticed if you're on the online portion of Zoom, there is a chat box, and you could chat your question there, and we'll try to look at those at the end of the presentation and try to cover as many questions as we can, but we want to try to keep the webinar to 1 hour because we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I do want to just kind of give people a heads up that our internet service today has had a few hiccups. I am crossing my fingers and praying that we don't have issues, but if something like that were to happen and we suddenly disconnect, then we will try to reconnect as quickly as possible. But let's hope that does not happen. And of course, lastly, we are recording this presentation and we plan to make it available later this week. So at this time, I want to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Josie Badger, and just want to share a little bit about her. She received her bachelor's degree in disability law and advocacy, a master's in rehabilitation counseling, and a doctorate in healthcare ethics. In 2014, she founded J. Badger Consulting, Inc., where she provides youth development and disability consulting services for organizations on transition and leadership development. She serves as the director of the National RSA Parent Training and Information Center Technical Assistance Center, RAISE. She is the campaign manager of the hashtag I Want to Work campaign to improve the employment of people with disabilities, is a field organizer for the Family Care Act that supports paid family leave, and is the developer of TRAIL, a statewide advocacy and lobbying training program. She serves as a board member of the United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania, the Woodlands Foundation, the Mary Grace Hospice Foundation, and FISA. In 2012, Dr. Badger was crowned Miss Wheelchair America, and it's through the Miss Wheelchair America organization that I met Josie the year that I competed at the national level. She was actually one of the judges. So without further ado, I'm going to turn everything over to you, Josie, and you just let me know if there's anything that you need in terms of, the access to share anything.
Great.
Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As you probably noticed, I have a different accent than Ms. Glenn. I am, as she mentioned, from Western Pennsylvania, and so I really am excited to be able to do this interstate discussion with all of you. And I have a PowerPoint, I have videos, but I really want to share with you a little bit about me and my history with advocacy. As Ms. Klein mentioned, it sounds like I am just this amazing advocate for people with disabilities, and I'm a lobbyist, and I have it all together. And that's just what shows up on paper. Um, but really, it's about development of those skills. No one is born to be a leader or an advocate. And so that's something I want to share with all of you, is that these skills are something that are honed, that are developed. And I have to say, I have congenital myasthenic syndrome, which is a neuromuscular condition, but it's really rare. I did not get an official diagnosis until I was 11 at the Mayo Clinic, and I had multiple muscle biopsies. And to be honest, I think that some of the 11 years of medical testing really created some of my personal advocacy skills. Being stuck in children's hospitals, being forced to undergo testing that was actually very detrimental to my health. And although those were difficult times in my life, they were times that truly supported my development as an advocate. And so I guess it's beneficial that I'm an extremely stubborn, bullheaded person. If any of you are as well, there's a reason that you are, and that makes you better at being an advocate. And so when I was graduating high school, I was not comfortable with being a person with a disability. Back then, I used a scooter. Now I use a power wheelchair. Currently, I use a ventilator full time. Back then, I used a ventilator when I would be by myself, when I would return home from school, because I was so embarrassed and conscientious of who I was and what I looked like to others that I would often try to hide as much of my disability as possible, because I truly felt that people who saw how quote unquote disabled I was would treat me different, would see me differently. And so when I was 18 years old, I was going into my senior year of high school. My mom and my dad, who were both high school teachers, literally forced me to go to this disability leadership conference for people with disabilities. And it changed my life. For the first time in my life, I met young adults with very significant disabilities who were changing the world without trying to hide their disabilities. And being a person from a rural environment, being a person like a farm girl, I had never really met a young adult with a disability who I saw as a role model. And so that changed my life forever. And so knowing other individuals, especially young adults with disabilities, who were proud of who they were and who were not ashamed, and who used their place in the world to make a difference, truly changed my life. And so that's where I come from. And as Ms. Klein said, yes, I was Miss Wheelchair America, which is crazy. Like, I look back, I'm like, wow, how did that happen? Because when I graduated from high school, there was this young man in the front row of my graduating class, and I was valedictorian, and I saw his face, and he had made fun of me when literally I think I was like first grade, something very young, and it stuck with me so much that when I saw him looking at me, I almost blacked out, because I thought about how much I was being watched and judged, and I didn't realize the power of my voice. And that's what I want to share with all of you, is that in part because of your place in society because of your disability. You have this amazing role because you draw attention. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that in a positive way, that because you have a disability, because you are quote unquote different, you have the ability to draw attention and to use that attention to make a difference. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Give me one moment. And while I'm pulling this up, thank you guys for jumping on. I know it's your evening. I know that there could be many things that you are doing right now. So thank you for joining us. Okay, so getting started. So one thing I want to share with you all is the difference between advocacy and lobbying. I'm not going to belabor all of this, but something important that you should all know is that sometimes if you have a job, they will tell you you shouldn't lobby. And the reason for that is if they receive certain funding, like a business receives governmental funding or money from different organizations, they're told not to lobby, which means that you should not be working on a particular piece of legislation with a legislator. Okay, because then you start showing your partisan beliefs. However, advocacy is permitted no matter where you are and who you are. And that is, in general, it means that you are speaking up for a general topic or an issue that is important to you. And that is different from lobbying, because lobbying means that you are talking about a specific bill that you are pushing forward or a particular person. So advocacy, you could say that you represent people who have neuromuscular conditions or who require assistance in breathing, which I do as well, and that you are worried about blank. You're worried about healthcare, you're worried about personal care attendants, whatever, and those are permitted. The lobbying is where you might get a little more resistance. So I want to tell you a little bit about my role in lobbying and advocacy, not just in my own life, but further up into the state level. So I am the campaign manager for the hashtag I Want to Work campaign. And that is part of my work under my personal business. And so I am hired to support the legislation that supports people with disabilities. The first bill that we started to really work on was the Work Experience for High School Students with Disabilities Act. And this legislation, although it sounds like really small, it had a huge impact. This bill in itself, which was passed unanimously throughout the state, made sure that the Office of Vocational Rehab, which you might call vocational rehab, you might call the Bureau of Vocational Rehab, make sure that students with disabilities while they're in high school get the opportunity to have paid employment opportunities. Most of the time, we as people with disabilities maybe get to volunteer, but we know statistically that people who have paid job experience while in high school have a 2.5 times higher likelihood of being employed as adults. Our second bill was Employment First, Pennsylvania, and basically what this bill did was to make sure that employment, paid integrated employment, that was competitive. So integrated means with people without disabilities, and competitive it means at least minimum wage, was the first goal for all people with or without disabilities in Pennsylvania. And so that meant we created some commissions and some councils to make sure that all people could obtain employment if they wanted to. And then the bill that is near and dear to my heart that I am working on right now is medical assistance for workers with disabilities. And what this bill will do is it will allow people with disabilities who require Medicaid to buy in to the program no matter how much they earn. So if they have a disability that otherwise would allow them to receive Social Security, but they have an income, they can still receive Medicaid. And that is so important for me because if you require any level of support like I do, whether that be nursing care or personal care attendants or a ventilator, the expenses of those are so high that we could not afford those, and private insurance will pay for them. And so through this bill at the state level, it will allow people to earn as much as they can and save as much as they can, but still get medical assistance, or we call medical assistance is the other name for Medicaid in Pennsylvania, so Medicaid. So something I wanted to share with you that we found super important as we were working with legislators is that when we were advocating for high-level bills, so state level or federal level, we wanted to make sure that both the House and the Senate introduced identical legislation in both chambers. And we wanted to make sure that the majority parties were the ones that initiated those bills. So in Pennsylvania, both our House and our Senate are primarily Republicans, which I bet Tennessee is not far off of that. And so our first sponsor of our bill in both the House and Senate were Republicans, and then the second sponsor was a Democrat. And that was really important so that people saw that it was a bipartisan, both party concept, but also that it was an important issue across both chambers. The House and Senate both saw it as important. We made sure that we included personalized thank you notes to everyone, and whether you are working at a state, a national, or like your own job level, thank you notes go a very long way. And making friends, engaging all office staff was really important. And so sometimes you will find, whether it be at your job, a school, or at the state level, you will find people in offices that get it. They understand where you're coming from, or they're at least empathetic to your issue. And that was really important in helping us to move legislation or an idea forward, is helping to connect with those people that quote unquote got it. Some additional tactics that we worked on. We talked about bipartisan, so making sure that people on both ends, conservative and liberal, signed on, engaging all office staff. We had lobbyists, but I will tell you directly that the people with disabilities, including myself, were the best advocates because we have the ability to share personal stories. We have the ability to be a face to an issue that a lot of lobbyists don't have. But we also worked with lobbyists to kind of know the ins and outs of the legislation. And similarly, if you're working at a certain business, if you're able to connect with someone who's higher up in that organization, that is so helpful in trying to build that connection, to build the trust, and to see where the true focus is of the decision makers. And once again, the thank yous. Thank yous go a long way. But we also found that social media was a huge part of our success. We used 4 channels. I believe we used Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. And we would tag those decision makers in every positive thing that we did. So every time we meet with them, every time we got a picture with them, we would tag them so that others saw them affiliated with our requests. And it really also promoted those decision makers platforms, because the more times that they were tagged, the more people that saw them. And that is, in general, a public official's wish is for people to see them doing good stuff. Um, we did a lot of selfies. And so we would get pictures of us with the decision maker holding a sign that said, hashtag I want to work, or hashtag employment first. So the sign we would have was pretty directly affiliated with our request, but then the selfies would connect us as people with disabilities who address that issue with the decision maker. We would post them online, we would tag them. And so in the public eye, they were seen supporting this issue. Of course, we would ask for permission, but they really liked this. And some of them would even ask for selfies because that public recognition was really good for them as well. And then directed messaging. We would make sure that if we had a specific issue, that we would tag those people who were in charge, whether it be committee members, whether it be city council members, but making sure that the right messaging was sent to the right people was really vital. I'm not going to go through a lot of this in great detail, but I will say that through our social media, we have been able to meet millions of people, and that has truly changed the dynamic, because the decision makers would look at how wide our audience was and realize the impact it had, and so they wanted to jump on that wagon. They wanted to be a part of that movement. Okay, so advocacy first step. Your story. Why tell your story? So I shared with you a little bit about my story, about how uncomfortable I was with who I was as a person with a disability, as anything that wasn't quote unquote normal. But I realized that those differences is what make us powerful. Those differences tell a story. And that is why all of your stories are so important. It helps you to connect with other people, or to highlight an issue that decision makers may not have known before. Your face, your story, may be what people remember when they think about a certain issue. And so that is why it's so important. And by sharing your story, I can promise you it will increase your confidence and your ability to speak up for yourself. It is hard to tell your story, but the more you do it, the easier it gets, and you will start to see the parts of your story that truly have an impact on people. For me, I like to use serious, I like to use humor, because it addresses all types of people. And you will start to be able to see that as you speak to more people. It helps others to organize their thoughts, to relate to other people, to push a certain particular case, and to understand where a need or action or for an action exists. So they might not even realize that there is a problem or a barrier until you bring it up. When I started advocating, I had thought that decision makers knew the barriers faced by people with disabilities. I was wrong. A lot of them really have very little experience. And so the more that you can hone that relationship, the more that you can share, the more possibility that those decision makers will be able to look back at what you've shared and really think about how certain bills or decisions may affect others with disabilities. So, what makes a good story? Stories can be unforgettable if they are emotional. And I'm not saying every story has to make you cry, but there is something important and special when you are vulnerable with people, when you are able to share those highs and lows, those times in your life that changed your life forever. Um, those are important, but then on the flip side of that is being relatable. So for me, my story of living in a hospital on and off for 7 years, yeah, that might be emotional, but that's not relatable. But if you can talk about children being in the hospital by themselves without their parents for a long period of time, if you can kind of spread that story to touch on other people's lived experiences, that is really, really important. The clear message is so important. We talk about the C's of sharing your message. So clear, concise, and comprehensive. We talk about how important it is to make sure that any story that you share has a very clear message, that it's to the point, and that it shares enough that you're not wondering why they shared that story in the first point. And then being to the point, the concise part. So people, especially decision makers, have a lot of people talking to them. They have a lot of stuff going on. So if you can be as to the point as possible, that is helpful. So I'm going to share a video with you guys that talks a little bit about being persuasive and what does that really mean as you're sharing your story. So give me one moment.
In 2009, a man, a journalist, by the name Rob Walker wanted to find out is storytelling really the most powerful tool of all? And in order to do this, he went on his computer and he bought 200 objects from eBay. And the average price of the objects were about $1. He then called 200 authors and he asked them, hey, would you like to be part of the significant object study? Which means that I would like to write a story to one of the objects. And 200 authors said yes. So there he had 200 objects, he had 200 stories, and I assume that it was with nail-biting anticipation that he went on eBay again with all the 200 objects. Would there be a difference? Would there be a change? Do you think there was a change? One of the objects was this beautiful horse's head. There we go. The beautiful horse's head. Now this beautiful horse's head was bought for 99 cents and was sold when the story was added for $62.95. That is a slight increase of 6,395%. So was this a one-off situation? Not really, because he bought the 200 objects for a total of $129, selling them for $8,000. Now that's insane. But you know what's even more intellectually challenging to understand is how can you and I go to the movies and pay good money to watch movies like James Bond, who are absolutely unrealistic. And we sit there, we enjoy the movie, and some of us, we really enjoy the movie. And we leave the theater going like, God, what a man! I would like to be more like him. I'd like to walk like him. I'd like to talk like him. I like Bond. Wonder how I could be more like Bond. And then this weird revelation hits you like from nowhere, and you come up with a brilliant idea to walk to a watchmaker shop. And wow, it just happens to be an Omega watch in that shop that resembles the one that Bond was wearing in the movie. And you pay $10,000 to put that watch on your wrist, and you leave that store feeling more like Bond. How is that possible? PQ Media tells us that $10.5 billion is turned over in product placement revenue every single year. How is it possible for you to be so easily tricked by something so simple as a story? Because you are tricked. Well, it all comes down to one core thing, and that is emotional investment. The more emotionally invested you are in anything in your life, the less critical and the less objectively observant you become. And the greatest emotional investment of all is falling in love. Now, falling in love resembles a good story. Do you remember the last time you fell in love? Do you? Good for you. It's a beautiful feeling, isn't it? Do you remember how you longed and how you yearned and how you dreamt? And then you looked at her and maybe you thought, God, I love the way you chew that apple. So crunchy. Oh, and the way you slurp that tea just over the edge, you know. Oh, it's so sexy. Love it. And then about 13 months later, when you biochemically fall out of love, 13 months later, on an average, you fall out of love. Suddenly, you find yourself sitting in the sofa. And you go, Jesus Christ, where did this thing come from? Oh my God, and where are my friends? This is a weird thing. And then suddenly you hear a sound. You go like, what's that? And you go over to the kitchen, and you look, and you go like, oh, it's you. You're eating an apple there. Could you just keep that down just a little bit? Yeah. You're kind of spraying the table there. Please don't. And you sit down comfortably again, and just a minute later, you hear somebody drinking tea from the kitchen going, and suddenly, this is all annoying to you. Have you been there? Sadly enough. 13 months later, our critical thinking and our cortex comes home from a 1-year-long vacation, and we start questioning things. Now, during those 13 months, what happened was that your brain was flooded with neurotransmitters and hormones, hijacking your cortex, throwing your objectively observant skills out of the window. And the thing with storytelling is that the same thing can happen. In stories, the same hormones and neurotransmitters can be released. Hormones like vasopressin, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. And do you know what? That's what I would like to do during my talk. I would like to induce 3 hormones into your brain. I call it the angel's cocktail, so it's a nice cocktail. I would like to start with radically increasing your dopamine levels. And I need your consent on this. Is it okay? Cool. And if you don't like the idea of that, you'll just have to cover your ears. So dopamine, this is what it looks like. And when you have that in your blood, these are the beautiful effects. You get more focus, more motivation, and you remember things in a better way. So what does dopamine feel like? It feels like this. About 6 years ago, I received a phone call from a woman who represented one of the biggest training companies in Scandinavia, and she said, hey, David, we've got a lot of trainers in presentation skills and in rhetorics, and we would like to increase the level of all of these, and we think you are a perfect pick. Would you like to come to a meeting? I'm like, wow, I'm honored. I'd love to. And I come up to Stockholm, and I'm going to their office, and just as I am going to pull the handle down, what I don't know then is that I'm walking into one of the absolute worst meetings I am ever going to have in my life. But I don't know that yet, so it's okay. I open the door, and I meet this woman. Her name is Lena. And hurriedly she says, David, just so you know, I'm not the one you're going to have this meeting with. You're going to have it with 3 gentlemen further on here. And I'm like, okay, that's a bit strange. Usually you know who you're going to have the meeting with. And then she progresses with a bit of chit-chatting, and then suddenly she says, are you ready now? And I'm like, yeah, what should I be ready for? And then she says, just so you know, can you see the room over there? And I go like, yes, I can see it. Well, in that room, you have the 3 gentlemen. Just so you know, they're all majority owners of this company. They've all got an ex-military background, and none of them wants the training that you are going to pitch.
Booking a family vacation in a Verbo means leaving all the craziness behind. Well,
I'm like, come on, why am I here? And it's like, well, all the trainers want this, but the management they're on too high horses. They can't see that they need it. So it's pretty simple. The only thing you have to do is go in there and kind of, you know, just prove the opposite. I'm like, yeah, that sounds simple, doesn't it? And I can remember myself. I'm walking towards this office. My sweat is coming down my palms. My heart is racing. And just halfway there, she calls my name. And I still, to this day, don't know if this woman is sadomasochistic or just downright unintelligent. Because she calls my name and she goes like, David. And it's like I'm going to get a tip, you know, something like that. So I turn around to ask her, go like, and she says the following. If I don't tell you what she says there, is that annoying? Well, actually, as an example, I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to prove to you what it feels with high dopamine levels. Would you say that your focus was increased? Your attention was increased? You were creative, you created situations around this, and you probably already figured out what that room looked like, correct? And you remember that I did that to you for quite a while. Now, the feeling you had there was high levels of dopamine, which is beautiful. So how do you do that? Well, what you do is you build suspense, you launch a cliffhanger, and the most beautiful thing of all is that all storytelling is per definition dopamine creating, because it's always something that we're waiting and expecting. So just imagine, just by using storytelling, you can get those techniques. You don't have to do a cliffhanger like I did. So that was the first hormone. I'd now like to go to oxytocin. Is that okay as well? I'll induce that. All right. The beautiful effects of oxytocin are the following. You become more generous, you trust me more, and you bond to me. Do you want to do that? All right. All right, so this was 9 months have passed, and it was a planned cesarean. And the little brother, who was 5 years of age at that point of time, he was kind of really looking forward to what's going to happen. He was going to become a big brother. And he'd helped us pick out the wallpaper, he'd helped choose the bed linen. He'd even saved his own pocket money to buy a little stuffed animal, which was placed on the pillowcase. And about 2 days before the planned cesarean, something happened. Something wasn't right. The parents something was off. And the day before, there was simply no movement in the stomach. There was no heartbeat. You couldn't feel or hear anything at all. So the parents were rushed into hospital, lay down on a bed, and the doctor comes in, checks the stomach, looks at me, and sees what I see, and that is that the heart is no longer beating for this child. This was me 9 years ago. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. And I don't know, can you just imagine what you have to tell, how you tell that to a 5-year-old? Can you just imagine that? Because he's home there waiting, anticipation for this coming event. But it won't happen. So part of me, and to handle that, I talk about it. And I've talked to you about it now. And now, you got higher levels of oxytocin in your blood, whether you want it or not, which means that you feel more human. You're bonding to me, and you feel more relaxed. So how do you do that? In storytelling, you create empathy. So whatever character you build, you create empathy for that character. And oxytocin is the most beautiful hormone of all, because you feel human. Now the third and last hormone is endorphins, and I would like to show you a woman which we can say has overdosed on endorphins. Let's just look what that looks like. Oh, we'll go here.
To inspire and to respond. Are you speaking or listening?
I'm sorry. To speak and to listen.
To inspire and to respond.
To inspire and to respond.
And in all circumstances.
And in all circumstances.
Of our life together.
I'm sorry, of our life together. Of our life together.
Loyal to you.
To be loyal to you.
With my whole life.
With my whole life.
And with all my being.
And with all my being.
Until death parts us.
Until death parts us.
Oh, the timing of that is so lousy, isn't it? So how do you create endorphins? Well, you make people laugh. What happens then is that they become more creative, they become more relaxed, and again, they become more focused, which is beautiful to have. Now, all these three hormones that I've induced into your brain now is what I call the angel's cocktail. But there is an opposite of that cocktail, and I call that the devil's cocktail. And the devil's cocktail has high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. And they feel like this. Ah! Sorry to do that to you. So high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. And the problem with that is that if you got really high concentrations, which I didn't give you there, but when you got high concentrations, look at this. Is this something that you want to have the people you talk to have in their blood, in their system? No. Now, in our stressful work lives, in our stressful lives, many times, when you present, when you communicate, when you deliver meetings, which one do you think they've drunk most of? The devil's cocktail or the angel's cocktail? Most commonly, the devil's cocktail. And the problem then is that you've got all this to work against. But all of that can change today. All of that can change by you starting to use something I call functional storytelling. And functional storytelling means that you do these three things. One, you have to understand that you don't have to be a bearded old man in front of a fireplace with a dark voice in order to be a great storyteller. In my experience, when I train people, everybody is a good storyteller from birth. The only problem is that you don't believe in it. The second thing is this: write down your stories. You'll notice that you have 3 to 4 times more stories in your life than you normally, or than you thought that you had. 3, index those stories. Which of your stories make people laugh, i.e. create endorphins? Which makes people feel empathy, i.e. oxytocin? And the next time you go into a meeting, you pick the story you want to release the hormone you wish in the person that you're talking to get exactly the desired effects that you want. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, you know me, some of you know me as Mr. Death by PowerPoint. And I want to round off with making my point very clear. And my point is this: 100,000 years ago, we started developing our language. It's sound to say that we started using storytelling to transfer knowledge from generation to generation. 27,000 years ago, we started transferring knowledge from generation to generation through cave paintings. 3,500 years ago, we started transferring knowledge from generation to generation through text. 28 years ago, PowerPoint was born. Which one do you think our brain is mostly adapted to? Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So I shared that for a few reasons. One, I think it shows a really amazing demonstration of the importance of storytelling, the importance of different parts of the story. And the other reason I shared it with you is an important part of knowing yourself and knowing what you need to be successful. And so I knew when going into this presentation with all of you that I'm really grateful that I was able to do. I knew that as a person with a pretty darn significant disability, that I've worked the entire day. I know that as the day goes on, my voice, my tongue, my eyes get weaker and weaker. And so I need to take time to recover from talking, from swallowing, from moving my eyes. And so before we move on to these additional aspects of advocacy, I wanted to share with you that a huge piece of sharing this video was about self-awareness. And self-awareness is about not only knowing yourself, knowing your strengths and your limitations, but also setting yourself up for success. And so for me, when I am stressed or when I've worked all day and need to keep working, I know that my mouth, my body is going to give out. And usually one of the first things to go out is my speech, my ability to iterate sounds. And so I knew that I needed to be able to pace myself. And part of that is giving myself breaks to regain that strength. And to be an advocate, whether you're looking at self-advocacy or, at a higher level, is knowing your strengths and weaknesses, knowing what might stress you and how stress affects your body. As I mentioned earlier, when I was in high school and giving my graduation speech, I looked at this guy. His name's Brad. Brad doesn't have any idea the impact he had on me, but looking at him and the stress that he caused me literally made me almost black out. And so you need to know your triggers. You need to know how stress affects you and what can help you regain composure. As I can promise you that as you are advocating, there are going to be stressful times. Even if everything goes perfectly, when you are speaking, there are going to be situations that you talk about that are difficult to share, that just sharing them causes you stress. And you need to know those pieces of your story that might detrimentally affect you. And it's not about not sharing them, it's about setting yourself up for success and having backup plans, whether that be videos, whether that be having a friend there to talk when you are not able to. And so having those backup plans is so very important. So I'm going to share my screen again. Why, who, and where? Purpose. It is important to know what is the reason you are telling your story. So I've seen so many people who they're there for a specific reason, need a certain accommodation or whatever, and have a great story, but you can't see the connection between the story and the need. So it's important to know why you're there and how your story can connect to it. You need to know who you're talking to. So, for example, if you're talking to a legislator who maybe is more focused on economics, you might need to think more about numbers and price tags, whereas other legislators might be more focused on family. And so you need to be able to tailor your story according to who you're talking to. And where are you telling your story? What's the format? So if you're doing it online and you know that no one else is going to be responding to you, you need to be prepared for that. If you know you're going to be an audience, have an audience of 1,000 people, that's very different than one-on-one dialogue. So being prepared for that is important as well. Types of communication. You guys all probably know this from like 11th grade English, maybe way before that. We have verbal, we have nonverbal, written, visual, and all of us both give information and receive information very differently. Some of it are auditory or verbal. That is me. That is how I receive information the best. But I probably give information the best in a written format. So if you are similar to that, you might want to write out your remarks before you say them to others. If nonverbal communication, such as smiling and nodding, is hard for you, you might want to practice. If you are an artist and you are amazing at that visual arts, then that is a whole area that you should maybe focus your time on. Components of navigating a relationship. And I'm just going to briefly go through this so we have around 10 minutes for Q&A. But you're going to have that initial contact, whether you meet in passing with this decision maker or you make that phone call or that email. Then there's that meeting, which sometimes is the most nerve-wracking. It's probably a little bit more formal. And then building the long-term relationship, which is often continuing that dialogue, making an ask that is beyond the immediate. So, for example, if you are asking your medical company to provide certain support, okay, you might ask for that in the meeting, but you might have to continue that dialogue and continue that request way beyond that initial meeting. And creating that ongoing, more effective dialogue. So building the relationship, creating email conversation, whatever you find to be the best form of communicating your needs. When you are setting up the meeting, you're going to want to make sure you have all the information set up, the time, the name, the location. And I will tell you today, I had this problem. I work to support a disability advocacy training program in Pennsylvania for legislation and improving legislation. And I was supporting a participant in setting up his first meeting with a legislator. And he did not communicate that there were going to be a few different people on that call. And so there was this mess of trying to figure out how to get all 4 of us on a call when this individual from the senator's office thought it was just 2 of them and provided her private phone number. And so having those details figured out ahead of time is really good. Do your research, identify the person that you should be talking to, who makes those choices, who cares about that issue. Know the issue and what you need or want. So if you are looking for a specific ventilation support, what are you exactly asking for? And is this really a need? Like, is this life-sustaining, or would it be nice, and why? And know the potential barriers or arguments that come up during that. Make sure that you are on time. Bring any important information with you. Maybe you have a letter from the doctor. Maybe you have a one-pager. Bring that with you. Be clear about your position or what is important to you, both factually or on a personal basis. Listen to them. I think that we often listen to people to prepare a response, but we don't actually listen for what they're saying and listen for that. And provide an answer and plan for follow-up. So it's not just ending when you leave that meeting. Make sure you have a plan for later. The long-term relationship, the best relationships are bi-directional. And so ideally you email that decision maker, that person back, and ask for a response. Do you think you can help me with this? Could we talk in the future? And so prompting future discussions is really important in developing those relationships, creating opportunities where you can be supporting them. So you don't want to set people up for failure. How can you help them with the issue at hand? And that might just be providing information for them. And keep that conversation going, even if you don't need something. So it might be just, hey, thank you so much for helping out. It might be an article that seemed important that you just wanted to share. Those relationships that are ongoing will serve you well in the future. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up there, and I am going to just open up for questions. So anyone, do you guys have any? You can put it in the chat or unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I have will you be able to share those slides with us?
For sure. Let me see if I can actually do that right now. Yes, absolutely. And what's your name?
Bahia.
It's good to meet you. Let me see if I can share it in the chat right now.
Or if you could send it in an email, maybe.
Yeah, I can also send it to Ms. Klein and make sure it goes that way. That might be how I have to do it because it's telling me that I'm going to cause problems. So I'm going to send it in an email.
Okay.
Great. What else can I? And I love stories. Any personal situations? Andrea, what about from you?
Well, of course, this year my biggest advocacy endeavor was to get the COVID-19 vaccination in my state. I had found an aspect of phase 1A1 that included individuals with disabilities that could not live independently, and that perfectly described me. But the challenge was getting that across to the local health department and having them understand who qualified for that. And it was this whole journey, this whole process, and ultimately what ended up helping me arrive at the solution was to reach out to a state legislature.
Yep.
Let's see here. Somebody's trying to join here.
That's such a good question and point. So in Pennsylvania, I don't know where you all are living, but in Pennsylvania, it's sort of like the Wild West when it comes to the vaccines. We have maybe similar 1A, and that was initially a group just for first responders and nurses and doctors. Well, then people with disabilities and care providers were snuck into that at the end of January because I don't think that the state was ready to open up more categories. I guess hadn't thought about us first. And so the issue in Pennsylvania is that it is solely based on sort of if you can get to a pharmacy's link fast enough. It has nothing to do with your provider or a legislator. It's whether you can click the button fast enough. And in my advocacy heart, that felt so wrong that it was based on how fast you could click a button. But that's what it was. And so sometimes it is pure grit and perseverance.
Yeah, I think I ended up having to make 9 different phone calls, and 2 or 3 emails, and the last phone call I had assured me that I wouldn't have to bring any proof, but I had proof. I had the email exchange between the state senator and the attorney for the state Department of Health, and I was assured that that would not be needed. But then we got there in the line, and as soon as they asked, which part of that phase that I fell into, they were completely thrown off, and they asked us to pull out of the line. And so ultimately, I did have to produce that written proof that I had been approved and I met the qualification. So it looks like we've got a couple of chat.
I see that. So Beth, yes, I see your question specifically relating to medical advocacy. And literally before you jumped on here, I was talking to Ms. Klein about that being my hardest issue. I've gotten bills unanimously passed through Pennsylvania. And when it comes to my own medical care, it is sometimes the hardest part. And I have been turned down so many times. And so I'm open for anyone that's done it well. I will say that documentation is helpful. I will say that probably the relationships are more important. I have personally done better when I have built relationships with insurance providers, with respiratory therapists, with doctors than when I try to go at it from a broader perspective and say, hey, like, this is something you should do because it makes physical sense or legal sense. I have personally done so much better when I became close enough to a person that I had their personal email or cell phone number and could talk to them one-on-one. Andrea, I'm going to ask you, like, do you have any recommendations?
I would second that whole thing with relationships. Anytime that I've, been successful with something, pushing for something I needed related to respiratory care, it's been about who I've known and, explaining to them very clearly, kind of like part of what you were sharing here, in a clear and concise way, why this matters and what difference this would make. But already having established a rapport with that person goes a long way.
Huge.
And then, if you find yourself in a situation like I have before with a physician that you just can't get things from, then you cannot shy away from or be embarrassed about getting a second opinion referral.
That's right.
Well, the first time that I encountered that, I was so afraid that I was going to offend that provider. But you have to get past that. And what that provider's nurse told me was that, we get these all the time. We expect these. This is just part of medical practice. So I think a lot of people don't realize that, and they stick with someone needlessly because of that fear of being, rejected by that current provider or upsetting that current provider.
And I know that it is 8 o'clock, so if any of you need to get off, I completely will not take offense, but I am going to stay on here to answer any following questions or comments. One comment from Victoria: putting things in writing means that they can't say they didn't get a message. Right on, Victoria. If you write it down, and sometimes that is literally just like putting on your notes that you talked to so-and-so about blank issue, and on blank date. That's not perfect. I would say email is better, but sometimes you just have to have that documentation that was said. Maureen, Ms. Wagner, I see your hand is up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I just had a question. We have a daughter who is going to be transitioning from high school to college. I know you're a storyteller. So do you have a couple areas where you needed to advocate, or you needed to, go to somebody and say, this is what I needed, and how did that work? And you said that you were, in high school, you were, how did you word it, about your disability? And how did you branch out of that putting yourself into situations in college?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. So, I it makes me sad how much we continue to have to prove our importance, our humanity as people with disabilities. When I was graduating high school, as I mentioned earlier, I was valedictorian, not because I'm brilliant. It was because I felt the need to prove myself. And so literally my life revolved around schoolwork. And I sort of regret that in certain ways. Not because of what I learned, but because of how much I limited my relationships. But when I was graduating, my IEP said I did not have to take gym. And so I had physical therapy to replace that. Well, the superintendent wanted to question that and say that I could not be valedictorian because I did not complete gym. So because I couldn't run a few miles around the court, I wasn't be valedictorian. And so that was one situation where storytelling, but more so advocacy and having connections was super important. Number one, IEP, having that IEP allowed me to not take gym and be able to still be valedictorian, and have that legal backing. But who would think that once you're out to the end of your high school career, you have fought so hard to do so well in classes, and someone wants to question that because you didn't complete gym? Okay, so that is one. Let me think about that storytelling piece a bit. But the way I think that I branched out in college was that I had really pegged myself in high school as the quiet, smart girl because I wanted people to see me as something more than a disabled girl. And so I was willing to find any identity that replaced that. And I think that's actually where a lot of kids get into trouble and get mixed in maybe with some groups that aren't as positive, is because they want to be accepted. They want to be seen as something more as their disability. So fortunately, I was that smart girl per se, and so people, that's how they saw me, as not as like the disabled smart girl. So once I moved to college, I did live on campus, but I was 15 minutes from home. I was able to reconfigure my identity per se. I was going into a group where I did not have a pre-existing quote unquote identity, so I could sort of make up who I was. And so people were getting to know this new person, this new Josie that was okay with her disability, and that was really empowering because even now I believe that if I return back to that high school group, oh, God forbid, that I would return to that person, that smart girl who really didn't talk to anyone, that just wore, cowboy boots and flannels. Oh my gosh, nothing against them, but I wanted an identity that was not disability, and so I was gonna be that country girl who was smart and couldn't get away from those flannel shirts. What else? Anything
Thank
else?
you.
Yeah, absolutely, Ms. Wagner. I would love to talk to you more. As mentioned by Ms. Klein, I run the RSA, Parent Training and Information Center, which means I work on transition for youth with disabilities. If anyone's interested, it's RAISE, RAISE Center.org, and I focus completely on transitioning youth.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Okay. I know you guys are probably all pooped out too. Andrew, is there anything else I can do for you?
I'm trying to think of any other questions. I took some notes here. You mentioned 4 channels that you all used for social media. I think it was with your hashtag I want to
Mhm.
program. And I didn't catch one of those. I
Sure.
wrote down Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and I missed
Instagram. So, depends if you want the cool kids or the kids our age. So, the kids that are like 30 and under tend to be more on Instagram. So, you know, it really depends. If you're looking for true young adults, that's where you go. If you're looking at our generation older, Facebook. If you are looking to connect with decision makers, legislators, organizations, Twitter is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our Breathe with MD account kind of on all those platforms works that way too. On
Yeah.
Twitter, where all the pulmonologists and all the physicians tend
That's
to
right.
follow us.
That's right. And you can tag them where they will get that message, which is really very helpful.
Anyone else before we wrap up? Any other questions?
I appreciate, Stacy, your comment there. I'm just double checking. Oh, Avery.
Oh, we do have.
Social medias that we can follow. Follow me. So, couple ways you can find me. So if you look me up, just Josie Badger or Dr. Josie Badger, you'll find me either place. There is a stripper named Josie Badger. Don't follow her. It's not me. There's also a horse named Josie Badger. I am neither of such, but I think my photo is on both of them. So please, please join me, message me. I'd love to chat with you all more. You guys are awesome. Just the fact that you're on here is a big deal, and kudos to Ms. Klein for putting this group together. It's so important.
I think we got some really good takeaways here. I think the biggest thing is just telling your story and relating to your audience to accomplish what you're trying to push for, what you're trying to achieve in terms of advocating for yourself or a loved one. So,
That's right.
all
There's
very important
one.
things. And one of the things I've found, and I'm sure you have too, Josie, is it's empowering the more you do it.
Yes.
The more you speak up for yourself and the more successful that you are in getting the things that you need and want. It's almost like, it's addictive.
It is. It is. And let me tell you how addictive it is to empower others. Like, the more you empower others, it's like a gateway drug because you see people's worlds blow up. And I know I can only do so much, but you guys could quadruple my efforts. So that's why it's so amazing.
Yeah, and then the other thing is the added bonus that a lot of times we don't think about is when we speak up for ourselves or on behalf of another person and we succeed and we convince someone and someone understands a need that they didn't understand before, we're helping all those people that come after us. So
That's right.
our one scenario could impact countless others. So that's the other reason if you shy away from advocating, you should try to break out from your shell, because know that it's bigger than you very often. So
That's right. And as best said, it's dopamine. I am a dopamine junkie, obviously. So yes. Oh, here's another. How do you handle folks parking in the inaccessible spots? I try not to run into them. Sometimes it happens. I will honestly say, because I'm a person in power chair and people see me trying to get into a car and they parked in the wrong spot, without me saying something good, people are like, oh my goodness, like that was a bad move. I I tend to be the person that attracts more bees with honey per se. There's always a place where vinegar comes into play, but I think that if we model and just live our lives, like go out there, do what you want to do. Don't be inhibited by people doing stupid stuff or whatever. The more you are out there, the more you park in parking spots, the more people are going to realize, oh wait, like there's a reason there's lines between parking spots. It's not that I haven't been in trouble before, but it's so important to actively live our lives to the fullest so that other people see us and realize the importance that we have in our community.
Anyone else? Going once, going twice? Any other final questions?
As mentioned, you guys can always Facebook me. Don't Facebook the horse or the prostitute, but if you find me, feel free to message me.
Okay, and I did get your slides, and I'm gonna try to download those from, I think I can from that message on Facebook and send those out. And I have everybody in a group that registered.
Great.
And probably will send the slides out with the recording of this. But maybe later this week, everybody. But we'll get those out. And just want to thank you again, Josie, so much for joining us. And everyone, just greatly appreciate you taking time out of your busy lives to join us tonight. And we'll go ahead and end there. Everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, take
Bye.
Care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Let me know if there's anything else I can provide to you, or if there's another training, just let me know how I can support you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You got it. Have a lovely evening. Stay safe.
Yep, you too.
Bye.